When is a goat not a goat, but also potentially a goat? Well, my apologies for trying to ram ideas into your brain. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now here on the MasakoX channel, we have been musing a lot about the villains of the past and what they mean for Dragon Ball's past itself, present and future, as being maybe rebooted into a new iteration of their former selves. However, the subject for today has only recently come to the fore, having only come into existence last year, despite being alive in theory in the Dragon world for 10 million years, making the likes of Belmod look like a whippersnapper. Today, we are going to talk about our new favourite goat man. Or so you think. Well, what do we mean by that? Yes, he is a fan favourite, having been lauded recently as a really sinister force against Goku, scaring the ghiblis out of the main character without even being in the same room as him, which is rather impressive if you ask me. Really going against the normal situation that we tend to find ourselves in Dragon Ball these days, really disrupting the status quo. I like that. Moro quite worthily joins the ranks of the villains in Dragon Ball, and in our minds, feels right to join them. Let's explain why we think this. Now, suffice to say, there will be spoilers discussed about the Dragon Ball Super manga here, so if you haven't read the manga yet, then I strongly recommend that you go and read it. It won't take you long, especially when you're using Viz's Shonen Jump service. I mean, come on, like $2 a month for all their English manga? That's not bad if you ask me. Anyway, you have been warned. Also, if you want to look into Moro from just the manga's point of view, be sure to check out my discussion video on all that you need to know about the arc and Moro the character that we did last week. Link up top. The newest addition to the world of Dragon Ball, going against the likes of Goku, Vegeta, in fact pretty much everybody. Even Buu is dragged into this, and that's saying something. He is a new manga villain who, quite frankly, took us all by surprise. But having said that, after the rather turgid affair that was the manga adaptation of the Tournament of Power arc, anything is better than what we got there. I mean, the anime did it better in our humble opinion. What also makes Moro a very, very tantalizing prospect to cover here, and to like in terms of a baddie, is that he doesn't have any convoluted backstory or very tenuous goals. He's not riddled with baggage or clunky timelines to pass through before you can fully appreciate the arc. Moro is easy to get your head around. He is a simple bad guy who just wants to absorb energy via life and essence of planets, and then go on to rule the galaxy. Is that too much to ask? After Zamasu's half-baked philosophical journey into justice for a Sunday morning show, and the definition of said chestnut and Jiren's knuckle-headed goal for absolute strength, we really needed someone and something more simple. A less is more kind of thing. Just give us a very straightforward ne'er-do-well who is just after a little bit of conquest here or there. Something classic. And Moro is a classy Capranai. In this video, we're going to dwell into how the likes of Toriyama and Toyotaro came up with this plan by delving into Moro's possible cultural origins. I personally think that it was more of a Toyotaro creation, Moro, due to the fact that this design is very menacing and quite creative, unlike things we've seen in Dragon Ball recently. And yes, I know, Toriyama may have greenlit the design and the overall character, but the initial concept to me feels a lot like Dragon Ball AF, and it's really starting to make its way into the official product, isn't it? Now that the apprentice himself has room to experiment and proved his worth with years of apprenticeship. Now first things first, we need to talk about the name, Moro. It's a very short name which follows the Dragon Ball model of bad guys with very short names, no more than 2, perhaps 3 syllables. Frieza, Raditz, Vegeta. Yes, I know, the English names have 1 less syllable still sometimes, you know, Frieza, Raditz, Vegeta, but that's due to localization. The point is that the monikers aren't convoluted. People can remember them quickly, which is good if you want to make a memorable character. The Dragon Ball wiki seems to think that his name, which you can also spell as Moro, as Molo, may come from the name Moloch, a Canaanite deity. When we look into this via ancient texts, he was mostly associated with the typical thing of childhood exchanges through tussles between factions. Moloch was an embodiment of this practice, as he was mostly an amalgamation of early Canaanite gods, as interpreted by early Judaism and Christianity. In fact, if you ask me, it kind of reminds me a bit of Herudegarn. He is traditionally depicted as a bronze statue, heated with fire, into which unfortunate souls are thrown into. He is a pit to which the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, for the greater good. Some people think that this terrifying rite is connected with Baal Hamon, chief deity of Carthage, who is depicted as a bearded older man with curling ram's horns. Whoa, Masako, wait a moment here. Ram's horns? Are you trying to tell us that our perfect goat boy is not a goat, but some sort of sheep? Well, yes, ram specifically, since he's a dude. And yes, Moro's features more resemble that of a typical ram rather than a goat. I mean, we all have called him a goat in the past, myself included, for the purposes of a joke, all due to the fact that he kind of reminds us of one at first glance, but realistically, it's not entirely accurate. We will get to that in due course, but first, let's try to find other meanings behind the name, as we believe that there could be more than one interpretation, perhaps, of the nomenclature. You see, Moro can also relate to the Latin word mori, as in the phrase memento mori, which roughly translates to the phrase, in time, your life will end. Yikes, morbid. In fact, it was common practice in Roman times for important people to pay a person to periodically whisper the phrase into their ear so as to keep their feet on the ground, keep them focused, prevent them from getting too puffed up in their smoke box, as my mum would say. There is also a thing called a Moro reflex. What's that? The Moro reflex is an infantile reflex that appears in fetuses during pregnancy, and these can actually last for a few months after the baby's been born. It's an involuntary action that babies do when they feel like they've lost support, like there's nothing underneath them, or have nothing keeping them in place. You can sort of experience this now when you have that sudden sensation that you're about to fall, even though you're completely safe in a bed or laying down or something. These gestures can include such things as abduction, spreading your arms out, adduction, pulling the arms in tight, and of course, babies crying. Out of the three potential origins for the name, this last one seems to be like the most tenuous if you ask us, but it might have been referenced in what Moro does. Now, when you go back into the manga, you witness something connected to the Moro reflex, perhaps. One of the first things that we see Moro do within the manga after he's introduced and lands on New Namek is pulling his arm in to abduct a child, in this case, Eska. And yeah, this may not be as groundbreaking as you might think, but we thought we would mention it as it does seem to be a really interesting coincidence. That, or maybe Toyotaro knows a thing or two about infant reflexes, or is able to use Google. We will never know. After the likes of Dr. Giro, the last non-alien Dragon Ball baddie, every single Dragon Ball main villain was a loner, more or less. They mainly worked alone at the end of the day, and were established as a solo figure. Yes, I know what you're going to say. Oh, well, they had minions to do work for them. They had fleets to spread their whims, they weren't alone. Yes, that's very true. But even if they did have a lackey, they weren't really numerous and they didn't work as partners in crime. Like them, Moro works alone and only relied on the likes of Cranberry as a means to an end, not out of any desire to make him a partner, as in an equal. He is just a mook in Moro's eyes to give him an Uber ride to New Namek. Moro literally uses one of the wishes to free his former and potential minions. He could wish for anything that he wanted, but he wanted their freedom, which is interesting and adds another layer. Maybe he knows that ruling alone is not fun, he doesn't want that anymore, or maybe he really needs that support. Moro reflex there. That's a new one for the Dragon world. But wait, Masako, what is this whole goat-sheep debacle that you talked about earlier? Well, firstly, let's see the differences between a goat and a sheep, shall we? While both hail from the subfamily Caprinae, sheep and goats diverge at the genus level and arrive as distant species. Sheep, Ovis aries, have 54 chromosomes. Goats, Capraegagris hircus, have 60. Sheep-goat hybrids, yes, a geep or a shoat do exist, but they are rare. Some goats have beards, sheep don't. But some sheep have manes. That's a tricky one, because Moro has a beard through most of the time that we see him off screen, or to be more accurate in manga form on panel, which he does then lose when he reverts back to his full power state and his full youth, proving that this beard might be part of his humanoid nature rather than a holy goat thing. In fact, you could argue that his transition back to his youthful appearance is part of the Dragon Ball tradition of having different transformations for bad guys, going from the aged, hunkered down old wizard to the young and determined warrior mage. But what about his horns? Well, goat horns are narrower and usually pointier, whereas ram horns tend to be thicker and curved, tending to loop around on the sides of their heads, like a ruminant tribute to Princess Leia. When it comes to the likes of Moro's menacing horns, they seem to mostly resemble those of a bighorn ram. So to us, even though Toyotaro uses both animals as his point of reference for the character, Moro actually seems to be more closely related to a ram and not a goat. Looking at the cultural significance of both of those animals, it is clear that we are meant to look at both of them in a rather similar regard. You see, goats have a lot of positive traits, as they have been associated with the likes of kings and the nobility, the gentry. Thor's chariot is pulled by Tangrisnir and Tangnjosta. At night, when he sets up camp, Thor eats the meat of the goats, but takes care that all the bones remain whole. Then he wraps up the remains back up again, and in the morning, the goats always come back to life to pull the chariot. Goats are also considered to be a clean animal in Jewish dietary laws. They were also considered to be a sacrificial animal. But of course, there is always another side to goats, a more mysterious side. The popular symbol that is the Baphomet of Mendes is often associated with a black goat. The 13th century Knight Templars were allegedly accused of worshipping this figure, which is nowadays one of the most famous symbols within Bohemian culture, and that of those wishing to practice magic. Okay, that's all very well and good, but what about pop culture? Since Dragon Ball references pop culture all the time, surely there are some nods to popular media out there nestled within Moro, right? Well, yes, of course. There's a lot of nods and references to galactic gastronomy and planet-eating villains in pop culture, of course the most famous being Galactus from the Marvel comics. But unlike Moro, he is depicted as a force of nature, sort of, and is not truly evil. He's actually more like a god in some regards. In fact, you could look at Beerus as a truer homage to Galactus. He blows worlds up based around food if it doesn't deserve to exist. Huh. The more you know. What makes this idea more likely is that we know that Toyotaro does tend to take some inspiration from Marvel comics every now and again. It's not weird to consider that he may have wanted to put a Planet Eater into Super directly, just as Toriyama put all of his Western references into Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Also, Haverock would not be able to rest easily until we've said that in his elderly form, Moro closely resembles a pretty classic villain from the Warcraft universe, Gul'dan, famously known for his signature Drain Life ability, which allowed him to devour life force from any living creature. So there he is, Moro, a rather simple villain with a very interesting design that just oozes evil. We do hope though that he won't outstay his welcome, and that we are going to remember him fondly for years to come. Because frankly, we've asked for an evil wizard for a very, very long time, and no, a certain potato-headed individual does not count. Stay tuned for some more coverage about this figure, as there might be more manga characters that we may want to talk about, but we don't want to sound like we are goating around or anything. So what do you guys think? Do you feel like we've gleaned a bit more information about Moro's origins? What didn't you know about him that you do now? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going, and I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!